So with that, we're going to pivot, as Stacy said, away from kind of the foundation philanthropic side of the coin into more of the public side of the coin in terms of government agencies, art agencies, state and local government. We've got some superstars with us. Let me see. Our panelist group is getting large. I see Lisa. Hello, Lisa Gedgaudas. And we have Mr. Orlove. Mike, you with us? I don't know if Michael Orlove is.
Yes, I'm here.
There you are. Megan Van Voorhis. Megan, did I see you're with us? Awesome, awesome, awesome. And I know Christian Gaines is going to join us, and we'll fold him in when we find him in the room. So, thank you so much. I know you guys are insanely busy and are doing incredibly important work. Again, this session is again connected to everything we've been talking about earlier this morning. What we're going to be talking about tomorrow, again, these big questions that we're asking as a community as we get ready for 2021 and beyond, and you know, understanding that again, if in our earlier sessions we're talking about infrastructure and networks and kind of the things that we either need to sustain or we need to build or reimagine, or think about like non-commercial media and sort of the future of all that stuff. I mean, we've got all these different elements that we've explored this morning. We're going to be talking about over the next 2 days. And, you know, ultimately it becomes an issue of resources and capacity, right? Good, Christian made it. It's resources and capacity, and how do we, you know, make that alignment to build these things and to fund them and to make them sustainable. And not only sustainable, make it so they can thrive, right? So they can actually do the work that they need to do. So Stacy and crew just really did a great job walking us through some of the philanthropic side of things. And now we're going to talk a little bit about where we are now with our public institutions and kind of our hybrid quasi-public institutions, you know, both in terms of where we are. I mean, it's impossible to not focus on where we are sort of in this dark night of 2020. But ideally thinking about where we were, you know, pre-COVID and where we want to be going post-COVID, you know, sort of as we think long-term. So Michael Orlove, I'm going to start with you. If you could, I think everybody in this conference, you probably have met and had dinner with at some point, but just for the sake of, for the exercise, could you just quickly kind of introduce yourself and give a tiny bit of background in terms of who you are and what your portfolio is at the NEA, and why don't we kick it off there?
Thank you, Michael, and good to see some familiar faces. I don't know if I've had dinner with even half of the people, but I can't wait for the day that we can actually sit in a room together. That would be wonderful. My name is Mike Orlove. I am the Director of Regional, State, and Local Partnerships with the National Endowment for the Arts, and I also oversee the international activities for the agency. I've been in this role for about 1.5 years. Before that, I was overseeing the Presenting in Multidisciplinary Works and Artist Communities portfolio. And before that, my previous life, which maybe connects more to this community, I worked for about 20 years for the city of Chicago, the Department of Cultural Affairs, which is now called DCASE. And I was really immersed in organizing concerts and music and festivals for the city. And yeah, I think is that a good enough background?
That's perfect. That's perfect. Lisa, why don't you do a quick introduction and just some of the things that you've been working on, just top level, and we'll get into the details as we go in the conversation.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Lisa Gedgaudas with the City of Denver. I run the Create Denver initiative here for the last 10 years, focusing on creative industries, doing research, policy development, advocacy, and grant writing and giving.
Well done. Very concise. Christian, why don't you say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Christian Gaines here. I'm the Executive Director of WESTAF, which is the Western States Arts Federation. We're a regional arts organization, one of 6 across the country. We represent the 13 Western states. And we're involved in granting, re-granting, professional development, technology, public policy, advocacy, that kind of thing, in a wide variety of arts, culture, and creative economy matters.
Awesome, Christian. Thank you. And Megan.
Everybody, good morning or good afternoon. So I'm the Creative Economy Manager for the City of Sacramento. I lead the Office of Arts and Culture as part of that function. We make grants, involved with art in public places, manage the, well, I connected to our film commissioner, who's a part of our office as well, in arts education. So prior to this, which is a relatively new role for me, as you know, Michael, about a little under 3 months ago, I transitioned from a longtime role in Cleveland serving, I left serving as the president of the Advocacy and Service Organization for Arts and Culture there, Arts Cleveland. So long history in terms of both service to the arts, advocacy on behalf of it, and now just really excited to be sort of traversing a new role at a really interesting time in our history.
Thank you for that. And Megan, let me keep with you real quick. And I would love for each of our guests to kind of touch on this if you have something that you want to add to what Megan is about to answer. But, one of, I think, the interesting sort of dynamics in the music industry and music community is it does feel like these sort of public and quasi-public and sort of, philanthropic, these there's an element of mystery to sort of navigating them, to understanding who the players are and what their role is and what their role is not. And I know in your previous role in Cleveland, you did a lot of work in terms of kind of ecosystem building, infrastructure, being a convener and a kind of a facilitator. And now that you've shifted over to kind of a city role, could you speak a little bit in terms of, if you're speaking to, again, our, participants who, maybe work in the local music industry, maybe run a venue, maybe are a musician, maybe a manager, but haven't really built a relationship with their local arts agency or their local government. Like, how do you what is the introductory sort of conversation about what does this relationship look like? What should they be asking for and looking for from you?
I think actually before even them really doing that, we really have a responsibility to know the sector that we're serving and to really define it in a way. So that's one of the things that I want to just put right out there, right out of the gate, is that one of the things that I've observed, both here in Sacramento and in Cleveland before that, is some real divides about the really quite unnecessary divides in terms of the creative industries that kind of exist, and these barriers or walls that get put up. And I think that we have a role as both, either in the service organization function or even in a city function in really helping people fully understand what the creative industries really are. And how everybody's, kind of playing together. I mean, I see that from a labor perspective. If you take it down just to the individual, most of those folks are operating in all sorts of different contexts. They might be working for a for-profit music venue. They might be performing on their own. They may be working for a nonprofit as a teaching artist. And so these divisions that we kind of set up are really sort of arbitrary. And a lot of it arises out of the way that we fund. And so candidly, most of the money that I've experienced has really gone to nonprofits, despite the fact that having worked with independent venues, know that most of them are operating on a razor thin margins. They do it because they love it. They want to contribute. They're helping to cultivate talent. And ultimately, there are questions about how we're supporting that. So I think that the big picture in relationship to that is that we have a responsibility on the one side, right, to make sure that we're embracing a wide set of people and that they are there and understand that, so that when they reach out to us, we can be better positioned to kind of work with them and help with them to identify how we can support their needs. So I think that creating, just stepping up and saying, hey, I'm a part of the creative economy here, and making sure that people get it is really important. And I'm going to be honest, not everybody embraces that language. I mean, if you look at, Christian from West Staff, I've been using your data for years from Creative Vitality Suite and using it here. Most folks define sort of the arts and culture sector as this one small NICS code, I guess, this one small arts, entertainment, and recreation, right? It's our museum, it's museums, it's theater, it's dance, it's live venues and whatnot. And that really is sort of a disservice, right? Because it's one side of a bigger picture. And so I think that that's really important. And I think that we probably all have to kind of come together and have a greater understanding of where we are right now. So I would encourage folks really step up, talk to us and begin to have the conversation. And we, I know, are grappling with this nationwide, right? how we're really embracing and discovering it. Did that get to kind of what you were thinking, Michael?
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Megan. And bringing Mike Orlove kind of into it just to either amplify or build off of what Megan's saying in terms of the constituents that you work with, or sort of the organizations and networks that you work with at the NEA, and how are they? What is your sense of what this sort of navigation point is between music industry, music community, nonprofit sector, and then kind of the public funding side of things?
Yeah, well, I was giving virtual thumbs up to Megan as she was going through her answer to your question. We all work differently. I think, at least from my side at the National Endowment for the Arts, we're the most stringent of the group assembled here. Christian and I probably have the most connectivity just because of our relationship between the endowment and the regionals. But even Christian will tell you that, in the conversations that we've had since the pandemic has started, I've just been saying flexibility, just like try to get money out there as best you can. We don't, as the federal funder, we don't have the same ability to move outside of the 501c3 not-for-profit funding strip, which is really something that, quite frankly, I've been questioning since the pandemic started. Is maybe one of the things we need to be really looking at is how we move forward in the future, and how we are able to fund folks is looking beyond that as the one signifier, the one qualification. And I don't have the answers, but I think that is one thing that I can't stop thinking about, is who can apply and who can't apply, and the accessibility to money, not just at the federal level, but at the regional level, at the local level. And I apologize that I have not been on this session until now, so I haven't been able to hear what other folks have been saying, but I have been so impressed with what the for-profit, independent music community has done just in the past 6 months, 7 months. The folks that started NEVA and Save Our Stages, and what they have accomplished really in that short a time almost eclipses what we in the arts world have been trying to do over 30 years, which is demonstrating how incredibly important the music community is to our country. Watching these testimonial videos from elected officials, senators and congressmen talking about how important music is to a community, my jaw dropped. So I don't know if I'm answering your question as much as really opening it up to another set of prompts. Is I've been learning a lot through this process, and I realize that at least the money that we have at the National Endowment for the Arts is not accessible to everybody. And to Megan's point earlier, we have to figure out creative ways that we're supporting everybody, and not just those who can fit into certain sectors. And so for me, it's been a great learning process. And I've been following it as intently as I think everybody else on this call.
Well, and that's a good, thank you, Mike, and bringing Lisa back in. Colorado on a statewide basis, and certainly Denver on a local basis, has been really innovative in terms of, and again, we can talk about pandemic stuff. I'd rather talk pre-pandemic and post-pandemic for the sake of this conversation, in terms of, sort of trying to really be grounded in understanding, what is the creative economy, what is the creative community in the region, and how do they need to be resourced, and how to sort of align those things. And again, Denver, and we've hit it at our conference a bazillion times, so many people have heard you kind of lay this out, so we don't need to kind of go through the whole history of this stuff, because you have unique resources and assets and Red Rocks and other kind of things that when we're back up and running, provide resources that many communities don't have. But thinking just sort of philosophically, how, and building off of what Megan and Mike were saying, what does that, from your standpoint, look like in terms of trying to figure out what is the city's role in understanding the sort of cultural ecosystem, and then providing either resources or networks or other things that a community, a city can do?
Oh, I can tackle that easily. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting over here, Michael, if you need any help thinking about how to get there for-profits and more individuals, I'm here. We've been trying to do that and turn arts and culture over on its head in that very manner, because historically we've been seeing it federally funded nonprofits. But, when we research music, it was, like, to Megan's point, it was incredibly important to go out to the community and ask for what they needed. And what was coming out of that was, we need safe spaces, we need DIY spaces that are compliant, we need housing, we need a lot of things. But more than anything, the funding that we were able to secure really went to how music does other things than just records and tours, and talk about all the many other things it does. And I think that's part of, like, unpacking and turning over that leaf, so that people really understand it's not like, oh, that musician, okay, why are we funding them and not the symphony? And it's they're providing education for children. They're providing new platforms right now during COVID, looking into the future. There's a lot of ways that we can be supporting that and funding that. And that goes for creative industries. But to Michael's point too, regarding, that was a nod to the National Independent Venues Association, NIVA, who is fighting for the SOS Act, Save Our Stages Act, and in the meantime raising funding also to give out. And I've been lucky enough to be a part of that crew. And all in all, this is a shift, but it's been difficult to give out that money or CARES Act funding or our own funding in an equitable way. And that's where I get caught up, especially when we need to get money out the door so quickly. So even when we can pivot or get our money into the right places, it has to happen so fast, and it's the usual suspects. No offense to them, they need it too. But how do we get into a more equitable, valuable system quickly? And that's the challenge I'm having right now.
Yeah, and we have actually a great question coming in we're going to get to in a second, and I encourage everybody, if you have questions, the Q&A window is a great way to do that. Oh God, lots of questions are coming. All right, let's go through a couple more things real quick. So Christian, I think, I think everybody's sort of touched on this. There's sort of the role of grant making. There's also the role of network building and sort of infrastructure, creation. I'd love for you to kind of touch on West Staff's philosophy about how you can best resource the field through leadership development, through technical tools, sort of looking at the needs in the fields and trying to be solution driven. Could you speak a little bit to that? It's kind of a broad question, I know, though.
Sure, Michael. Thank you. And thanks everyone who's spoken so far. I completely concur and relate and empathize to everything that everyone's been saying so far. The ambiguity between being able to support nonprofit and nonprofit-like for-profits, who are, for all intents and purposes, the same thing. And also, I also really relate to how to get really emergency relief and recovery funding out into the field as quickly as possible, and making sure that it gets into the right hands, but in an emergency fashion. This, I just wanted to put that out there. CARES funding, whether it came through the National Endowment for the Arts and the flexibility that Michael talked about, or whether it's CARES funding that's coming through states that's then getting into the hands of the creative sector regionally, the way that money is being distributed right now is being distributed in kind of an emergency and recovery manner. And that comes with a lot of really hasty, it's like a FEMA truck pulling up and, having to throw emergency supplies out. You need to get money to people's hands as fast as you can. And there's a lot of the times when you feel like you're going to try and ask for an apology later, rather than whatever it is, ask for forgiveness later rather than whatever that expression is. But anyway, so no, I really kind of relate to that. and yes, I mean, I think artists in general, musicians as well as visual artists, all kinds of performing artists, I think that often they have a hard time understanding where they fit into a network, or even understanding that a network even exists. And WestAF is one of part of those networks. We work with with arts organizations of all kinds, visual arts organizations, performing arts organizations, and with the creative economy kind of writ large. And we do that in a variety of different ways. As everyone else has been discussing here, we when COVID happened, we adopted a war footing, and we ended up distributing millions of dollars out into the field that came through public sources, through federal agencies like the National Endowment for the Arts. We developed a partnership with the Mellon Foundation, which is one of the bigger arts and cultural funding entities, and distributed another almost $2 million into the Western field to arts organizations in a relief and recovery emergency context. And frankly, it was really tough, heartbreaking to do, because it was a drop in the ocean. And I think anyone who is charged with distributing funding into the field feels that way. It's just not enough. It's just not enough. It's just not enough. And you're saying no to people for kind of perfectly worthy people for absolutely heartbreaking reasons. So that has been really tough, but also really necessary. And then, my background is actually in independent film and film festivals going back kind of a really long time. And, independent filmmakers and the film festival community, it's kind of the same thing. There's a lot of, filmmakers out there, just like there are a lot of musicians out there who don't necessarily feel like they fit into this arts and cultural ecosystem. They don't understand how they fit into it, and where to look and where to even start. Part of that is because, they're not necessarily thinking about themselves as a business or a business person or whatever. They're pursuing their art, they're pursuing their discipline, they're getting better and better at what they do. And they're looking for opportunities to be able to perform live, which of course is now harder than ever before. And so, like, I think that, for example, one of the things that WestAF does, we're sort of trifurcated. We're a big part into technology, a big part into advocacy and public policy and alliances with regional and national organizations. And then we do a lot of social responsibility and equity work as well. And we kind of invest in those three areas in really specific ways. And on the technology side of things, I think we spend a lot of time really focusing in on how to operationalize opportunity for artists, and how to help artists go to the web and understand what kind of opportunities there might be out there. Primarily, we're focused on visual artists. Two systems, one called Zap or Zapplication, the other one called Cafe, which is short for call for entries, allow artists to connect with art fairs and festivals, or really any organization that's doing an open public call, for art, for artists, for media. And so we've been really kind of zeroing in on that. I think another area that we've been really helpful, hopefully, as far as music and music touring goes in the Western states, is an Arts Endowment funded program that we run called Tour West, which funds nonprofit performing arts organizations to attract artists outside of their region. So it's something that would otherwise not be economically feasible for a small nonprofit music venue, actually can have the funds to take a chance on an artist to come into a region and perform there. So that's those are smallish grants, but they're usually enough to make that go from impossible to possible. And we administer those grants every year. We distribute anywhere between $500,000 and $700,000 a year on those programs. So So that's one place that we can kind of increase the network around here. And also, I do think that, for example, we represent the 13 Western states state arts agencies, and each of those agencies have kind of interesting programs that are specifically for artists. The Colorado Music Strategy, which is a collaboration between CCI, Colorado Creative Industries, which is our state arts agency, and the Bohemian Foundation, which is a great music music-oriented foundation, has created a whole program with a variety of different aspects to advance music in the state of Colorado. And in Wyoming as well. Wyoming has the Wyoming Independent Music Initiative, which is called WIMI, which also does the same thing. So if I were talking to artists in either one of those states, for example, music artists, I would want to turn them on to those programs, make sure that they understand them, see if there's an opportunity for them, in any of those programs, for example. So just wanted to throw those things out there.
That's a great overview, Christian, and I don't think you had a chance to also emphasize the work that WestF has done for many years and identifying some of the leadership challenges, across the West in terms of, making sure that there's much more equity and diversity in terms of, kind of network building and really thinking about, again, ultimately what is one of the most significant challenges we all face is who's at the table making decisions. And there are many aspects to that, some generational, some based on race and class, some based on gender. I mean, there's a lot of complicated pieces here. And I know I've always valued the work that the WestF team has done to be intentional around like creating those cohorts and trying to kind of rethink that. Because ultimately, I think the question is, or a question, I shouldn't say the question, a question that we struggle with is, as we said earlier in today's conference, many of the structures that we're dealing with implementing, whether it's public media or it's arts funding, are essentially still based kind of in paradigms that were established in the mid 60s or 70s. I mean, a lot of the fundamentals were sort of put in place, and we've kind of been building off those incrementally for a long time. And ultimately, what we need to do as a country, I would argue, is looking at, again, talking to Kwende from Ottawa earlier, some of the other guests we're going to have over the next few days. How do we, get out of our sort of box, sort of the lane that we've been in for a long time, to think differently or better, and who is helping inform those decisions, especially when we think about, again, I'm going to say it again, I can't believe I'm going to say it again, but this whole, 2020 notion of rebuild better, right? I mean, thinking about better ways of doing things, or build back better as we kind of move forward. And Megan, I want to bring you in, and there's a nuanced point here, which I think I kind of understand in my brain, but I would love to hear you explain it in a much better way than I could explain it. But the nuance between what's happening in cities around sort of traditional arts focus versus more of a creative economy lens. And what does that mean for cities to be investing staff and building infrastructure around this kind of creative economy concept, as opposed to more of a traditional arts concept? Does that question even make sense? And could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's really front and center as I noted, it was front and center in terms of what we were dealing with as we were trying to secure recovery funds in Cleveland and make sure that, which they were ultimately successful in doing, by the way. But, ultimately recognizing and appreciating, there are many creative actors. And I think too, just from an equity perspective, what we've seen in terms of where people of color and others are centering their work is really important. And I think that's, one of the things that I've pushed, at least as far as a data perspective. And that's why I'm really thankful for things like WestAF and Creative Vitality Suite, because I grew up in my career beginning to understand the economic lens, and through that data, being able to say, hey, there's a bigger picture. There's creatives in every industry. And then there are creative industries where there's a bunch of other people that don't have that as their core focus, and just sort of beginning to understand that dynamic, and even look at the demographics and say, hey, where are people centering, and how is our policy reflecting that? I think, when I came to Sacramento, the mayor and council was incredibly active in terms of providing support, something like $14.2, I think, $million. into the creative economy. And again, this was pre-me. They decided how they were going to distribute those funds. And they said artists are important. And they said creative businesses are important. And they said nonprofits are important. And then they created vehicles for that. And I think for me, it's been fascinating to kind of like watch that unfold, look at how that gets examined. And as we look at that after the fact to say, hey, what does that mean moving forward? Because that's where my question is. We look at all of these investments. Now we've set all of these expectations that we embrace this idea of a broader creative economy. What does that mean moving forward as we establish new infrastructure to really support, creatives? You can't walk away from that once you've opened that door, which I think is great, actually. But I would also add on the equity front, from the speed, the desire to get this out. I mean, the reality, that push for us to spend these funds by the end of December has been hugely challenging. And it also, just did, quite frankly, create a setup where you're going to reinforce inequities that are already there. The fact that people, have to use it for reimbursements means that people had the money that could make those expenditures in the first place, which means people who had access to those funds already and knew about it we're already going to have an easier time in terms of securing that. And we saw that, right? And people who have access to networks and opportunity and the power structure and all of that influences where the money goes. And so in the after effects, we have to look at that and say, what kind of resources do we make available for whom and how? And really, I think that's a tremendous opportunity to say for us here in Sacramento, here's how we spent $14.5 million and what did we do well and what does it mean, where maybe did we fall short and what does that mean in terms of where we move forward? So I think our job is about conditions, we in government can have sort of that systems level view and say, here's what it looks like out there. And, where do we need to step up where infrastructure doesn't exist or where can we catalyze where infrastructure could exist and those kinds of things. So hopefully that got to it, Mike, but
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think, this has been such a significant, kind of sea change. I feel like over the last, 10 to 15 years where, and again, this is a gross, generalization, but it feels that typically city leadership may have, back in the day, maybe they're kind of interested in music or they kind of see a little bit of a tourism lens. Maybe there's like a branding piece of it, but it's become much more hardwired into understanding that thriving music and cultural scenes are so sort of, baked into all these pieces, quality of life and economic opportunity. And then the other, again, income, drivers, neighborhood redevelopment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think part of what is going to be exciting over the next, next period of time on the federal level is getting back to things that the Obama administration did extraordinarily well, which is recognizing that the ultimate power of the NEA is not just in the technical staff, professional staff, and grant making, but the ability to sort of work those intergovernmental networks to understand where does music fit into education and their priorities? Where does music fit into public health? Where does music fit into HUD? And then you're not only talking about, much larger pots of money, but you're also sort of thinking with intention about like what ultimately is the good of these institutions and organizations and artists and what do they mean? And I always remember, having the, joy of a lifetime of accompanying Jamie Duffy and Andrea from Youth on Record, to the FBI to watch them get an award from James Comey 2 weeks before Comey got fired, because the FBI recognized that Youth on Record, is doing enormous things in Denver, to help with youth engagement and all the things that are necessary for, trying to make sure that youth feel like they've got a future. So the FBI is recognizing this stuff. So
can I build on that point, Michael?
Of course you can build on that, Michael. Orlove, to.
I mean, Christian and Megan were starting to talk about it, but there's something that I know I've talked to Christian about this ad nauseum, and you to some extent. And I'd like to give credit not to Obama as much as to FDR and that administration, which is understanding that musicians, along with all other artists, should be seen as skilled workers that possess something that is absolutely essential to society. We've forgotten about that. And I have to give credit to my friend Jen Cole, who's at ASU, who's a brilliant person. And she was the one that really was, back in March when we started talking about a WPA 2.0, She said that we need to start talking about artists, and musicians obviously fall into that, as a skilled, necessary workforce. No different than people that build bridges, no different than people that can pave streets. And so, how artists can be a part of a rebuilding process, whether it's healthcare, whether it's in schools, just across all sectors. And if you see what other countries are doing, our friend Anders sent us the new policy that Ireland just put, that I'll paste in the comments section. I mean, it's all centered around the creative workforce. All their rebuilding is centered around the creative workforce. So I am hoping, as we look into the next 4 years, that this isn't something that's just sitting in the National Endowment for the Arts, but it's also in justice. It's in housing and urban development. It's in education, that the arts are not seen as just funding an organization, but really a necessity for, how cities sustain themselves. So that's what's been brewing inside of me. And the last thing I'll say, some of you might know a guy named Kif Gallagher, who years ago came up with this brilliant concept of MusiCorps, which was kind of taking the AmeriCorps, concept and working with the, CNCS, and, inserting musicians in communities across the country, and they were paid, salaried with health benefits, and they were there to serve the community. And I think we really need to look back at those, those ideas that, what's old is new again. So I'll get off my soapbox and hand the mic back.
That's a good.
Just a quick.
Yeah, go, Christian.
Just a real quick update on that. So much of that comes from legislators, both at a state and a federal level, only thinking of factory jobs and office jobs, and only understanding those as a metric, and really not understanding gig economy at all. And we're now just starting, and technology has played a big role in that, but we're now just starting, and legislators are finally understanding, those who are in charge of making investments in community, investments in society and urban areas and so on, are only just coming to terms and understanding how to talk about the gig economy. So I think a lot of it was just that they only knew job, widget, metric. That was it.
Yeah. And, Christian, just to build on that too. And so, Michael, the translation aspect here, Michael, you and I have talked about this over these, months that we've gotten to get to know each other, and really beginning to think about, because this is when one of my most joyous parts about moving to the city of Sacramento is actually being in government and having an opportunity, like I'm in conversations with the economic development folks. I'm right there with housing. I'm right there with the neighborhood team and community development. I'm right there, and so, but what works then is that you have a translator in the room. So because I know economic data, I can talk about location quotient. I can talk about that in terms that they understand to help them do it. And then, and then also have the arts background to translate it back to the other folks. And I just think from an infrastructure perspective, in this country, we have to talk about how we're training people to play those roles. And, what does that look like? Because, I had 17 years of experience kind of working in that and building that set. And there were a lot of my colleagues that really don't understand the economic data in a way to be able to understand like how to use it. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, that those translators are really important, and the skill set that we're using to build that.
So I want to make a provocative statement, and I want to be very sure that I'm not being disrespectful to a lot of people who've done a lot of important work for a really long time. But I would just like to call out the fact that the Music Modernization Act was touted as sort of like the most important and meaningful and groundbreaking piece of music legislation, basically in like 16 years. And it does a lot of things that are really useful and really helpful, but I would argue, for the sake of this conversation, that it's unbelievably small ball. is unbelievably incremental to suggest that the Music Modernization Act, is sort of doing anything transformative when you compare it to the kind of conversations we're having, today and we're going to have tomorrow. And, I think our goal certainly is if we're able to kind of bridge that gap between what are we asking for, how do we rethink what we're asking for? And it doesn't all have to be funding driven. I do think I would suggest that it is rooted from a very pragmatic articulation of where do we have failure in the commercial marketplace? What is the disconnect between what the commercial marketplace has given us and is going to give us in terms of music, and what is that relationship, and what is the value and the importance of music, and how does that get lifted up? And if the commercial marketplace is not able to do certain things, that it has to be then addressed through policy, through funding, through philanthropy, et cetera. So, and again, this session is not intended to kind of solve those questions. This is 2 days of conversation that is intended to get us into a headspace collectively in December, so we're ready for 2021 and beyond. But I think everything that y'all, are saying is completely tracking again with the earlier conversations and some of the things that are going to be coming coming over the days. So this is really my the cliche of the Music Policy Forum conferences are that people's heads start to explode because there's a lot of ideas pivoting around, a lot of just things to try to synthesize and crystallize. And I know that's sort of the headspace I'm in right now because my brain is all over the place right now. But I would like to ask each of you, if there's sort of one, kind of thought you'd like to leave us with as we move into the next stages of the conversation, which again are going to be around data, around agenda setting, around protecting vulnerable infrastructure like live music. As you think about, the role of you and your colleagues, either in cities or at the federal level, or working at the regional arts organizations or local arts agencies, what is something that you would, kind of like to leave us with? Again, going, to a question that Jamie Duffy posed in the chat, which is really great, which is like, I'll do a version of that question, which is like, how should people be prepared to sort of relate to these communities? Does anybody want to take that first, or do I have to call on somebody?
I'm going to jump in.
Thank you.
For a moment. And I hope this all kind of gels together based on what we've all been talking about, especially infrastructure and the lack thereof, and how overdue we are for supporting non-for-profits and individuals, but certainly just not only just in rural, but not just urban, but rural areas across our state. And I'm thinking a lot about that because while going through CARES Act funding was extremely important, we were the city of Denver. We had a little more foot in the door there. I'm nervous that the state of Colorado and other states are losing money, losing their budgets at the very moment, and people are being furloughed.
Yep.
And I'm trying to think collectively for all of us, how can we better reach out to our cities and states across the US to help them in a time when they don't have that infrastructure to fight for federal funding, which is going to be the Band-Aid that gets us to the other side. And if Save Our Stages, for instance, does pass, we need to be ready in January, February, March. So how do we get our other cities across the nation prepared to pull that funding and have a way to distribute that equitably? So that's tossing that out to all of us to think about more.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Christian, any closing thoughts or guidance for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, and I think probably everyone on this call relates to this, but, stronger together, kind of a loose ragtag bunch is not going to be as effective as a community that's organizing, whether it's a city or a town or a community. If you look at something like SOS, or if you look at something like NEVA, this is really a group of people who kind of got together and really didn't know much and accomplished like an enormous amount by getting in front of the right people at the right time. And so I think it's stronger together, meaning kind of like understand everyone else in your community that is experiencing what you're experiencing, and then resource mapping, like really understanding what resources are out there and those that exist. I think people who are in distress often stay in a state of distress, and it's really understandable. Panic leads to paralysis, but once you can kind of get past that kind of stage of desperation and grief and start to organize and start to understand what resources there are, or what resources there are that have the potential to help, then I think that goes a long way.
That's so good. Thank you. Megan, any closing thoughts?
I would just, on the organizing front, I just have to be honest that I think this divide between this, one definition of arts and culture and, something else is really, really challenging, I think, us from being able to move forward. And those of us that find ourselves in a space where we've already embraced a broader understanding of creative industries, like I'm looking at you, Lisa, and Christian and others, I think we have a responsibility to talk to each other and think about how we lead our peers in looking at this and embracing this more widely. And I think that's a conversation that I would be interested in, because I experienced it where I was, I experience it now. And I think it's going to be really important for us on the togetherness front to be able to embrace that. And we know and we feel it and we understand it. And I think we can bring other people to that cause.
Awesome. Michael, Orlove, anything to wrap up with?
Oh, final words. I think, maybe building off of what Megan was saying, I take great pride in being a public servant. And I think sometimes people forget that our job, not just me, but the thousands and thousands of others who are working, whether it's at the federal level or at the local level, it's our job to serve the community, to serve the people. And so these conversations, Megan talks about the divide, these are all conversations we should be having in real time, and people should feel free to speak their mind. These shouldn't be closed, door conversations. It should be open source conversations. And so nobody has the answer, but we should be looking to come to solutions together. And people should not be afraid to reach out to, whether it's a local or federal elected official, and speak their mind and try to get their voice heard. I think that's probably the final thing I'd like to say.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you all for your work and everything you do for the music community and other communities, and obviously for spending time with us today. We know you're extraordinarily busy and have a lot on your plates.